yeah. Yeah. The enemy's public with Bro.Nasir, the soldier, the general who has no fear. Welcome to the channel that channels the energy. We don't just discuss the problems, we give you the remedies. Peace, love, and unity, it gotta be the rank and file, one unit camaraderie. Study together, train together, put our brains together. Organize, strategize, deputize, because the system is weaponized. Taking matters in my own hand. The bills with substance, you listening to a grown man. TEP will never sell out. If this stream ain't for you, log off and get the hell out. Like, share, and subscribe, cause we one tribe.
The evil person, or evil man or woman, whose nature is to be evil, somehow cannot become a righteous person.
I don't know how I got here. I just know I'm never going back. Just when I thought things were already crazy, it gets worse.
I'm back.
Quan?
Sapphire struggles to deal with her husband's alleged betrayal and coming to terms with Quan being alive after thinking he was deceased. Devante tries to keep a level head while dealing with family issues and unexpected disloyalty. Memories of Dre enters Devante's life in a way that he would have never imagined.
Fire Part 2, the finale.
Get your copy of Fire. It's definitely a must-read. If you enjoy hood books, this one is it. Just like the title of the book, it's officially Fire. Get it on Amazon, paperback or Kindle.
Peace. This is the enemy's public. I am Bro.Nasir. Just want to welcome everyone. I appreciate you showing up. I hope everyone's enjoying their evening. This evening, we're going to go over the spoils of war, the Geneva Convention, and Bootie. Now, they're all synonymous. The spoils of war, the Geneva Convention, and Bootie. We're going to unpack all three. Spoils of war refers to the property, resources, and valuables captured or seized from an enemy during an armed conflict. Historically, it included everything from weapons, gold, land, and supplies. Today, international law, the laws of war, strictly regulate this to prevent unauthorized looting and to protect civilian property. Ethical framework. The prize of war. Lawfully captured enemy property such as ships, military equipment, that legally becomes the property of the capturing state. Looting and pillaging, generally considered war crimes under modern international law. For example, the Geneva Conventions. Though historical armies frequently participated in this as a way to supplement soldiers' pay, Oftentimes, the women are spoils of war also. We'll get to that a little later. Reparations. In contemporary conflicts, the transfer of assets as spoils takes the form of negotiated state-level financial reparations or seized state assets rather than the on-the-ground plundering by individual troops. Now, historical texts. Historically, taking spoils was an integral part of warfare, specifically to property. Bootie refers to valuables captured on land. It's property and values captured on land, including women. Now, the term spoils of war refers to the profits or prizes taken as a result, again, of military conflict, which can be either legitimate or illegal. Legitimate spoils. These terms are items of property taken from the enemy during or after a conflict that are considered lawful. For example, if a military force captures enemy territory, the resources found there may be deemed spoils of war. This concept is rooted in the idea that the victors of a conflict are entitled to the resources of the defeated. Illegal spoils. In contrast, illegal spoils of war refer to the items obtained through looting or pillaging, which are considered war crimes under international law. Such actions involve the unlawful seizure of property that does not belong to the victors and are condemned by legal standards, meaning taking civilians' property. Legal implications are the legality of spoils of war is often debated, particularly in modern contexts where international humanitarian law seeks to protect civilian property and looting. The distinct difference between legitimate spoils and legitimate acts and illegal acts of pillaging is crucial in understanding the ethical and legal framework surrounding warfare. In summary, spoils of war encompasses a complex interplay of legality, morality, and consequences of military actions, highlighting the responsibilities of victors in conflict situations. Now, if we are paying attention to what we are witnessing today with the war that's going on in Iran. It happened in Iraq and it happened in Afghanistan also. Pardon me a second. Could everybody hear me out there? Put a 1 in the chat if I'm being heard. Please put a 1 in the chat if I'm being heard. Why this is doing this? If we are paying attention to what's going on in Iran right now, and what happened in Venezuela, and what continuously happened when it comes to war. The reason why the United States go to war with other nations is not necessarily factual. It's they use their propaganda machine to beat the war drum, tell us one thing, but it's really not. It's really falsehood of why they're in another country. Oftentimes it's sending the soldiers to these countries to be economic hitmen. And there's no bigger way of being economic hitmen than to seize the natural resources of the nation that you are in conflict with. Because if you are Iran, Afghanistan, Iraq, or any Middle Eastern nation, you become a terrorist to the West. The West can bomb these nations to oblivion and refer to them as the terrorist. The criteria of being a terrorist is not that you are committing terrorism, it's that you are against the best interests of American foreign policy. That's what makes you a terrorist, not that you are bombing and killing people. And the United States like to use words like, freedom, justice, equality, and democracy. And they say they're going to other countries to establish democracy. There's no way a nation can establish democracy in another nation, because democracy is supposed to mean, the rule of the people. And if you are another nation and you are establishing a so-called democracy in another nation, that's a dictatorship, because those people are not your people and they're not in your nation. So if those people want to live the way they live in that nation, it's up to the nation in particular to determine what their democracy is, not another nation, is where I'm going with that. So that's their democracy. If they're living a certain way over there, that's their democracy. No other nation can determine what someone's democracy is. Now, when wars are fought, the spoils of war oftentimes are the natural resources, the goods, the property, ships, weapons, anything that's seized. But when you pillage another nation of their natural resources, such as their oil or their resources that will suffice them as a nation, that's pillaging. That's theft, and it's pillaging, and it's crimes against humanity, because what a nation is doing is taking away the resources to suffice that nation and its people. That's pillaging. So when the United States go over to another nation and they say they're going over there to liberate the people, that's not so. They're going over there to take what doesn't belong to them. And they're calling it democracy. Now, we need to pay attention. Women are oftentimes the spoils of war. Spoils of war is not only called spoils of war. Spoils of war is also called booty. That's the origin of the word booty. Spoils of war. And as I stated, women were also the spoils of war. And they were taken. The spoils of war is taken by the nation that wins the war. And oftentimes they were taking the women by their permission, without their permission, if you know what I mean. They were taking the women. And that's where the origin Bootie came from. It was her in totality, not just her adornments, but her adornments became the booty. That's what that word came from. When men who were fighting a war, and it was done, it was allowed. I'm going to say this. It was allowed because a lot of times the soldiers wasn't getting paid. So in order to compensate the soldiers, they allowed them to have the women. They allowed it because they weren't getting paid. So they allowed the soldiers to have the women as the spoils of war. And they had to write an international law. That's just how wicked it is. They had to write an international law outlawing men taking women as spoils of war. Not saying it don't happen still. I'm not saying that women are not being taken without their permission during war. We're going to get to that another day. I'm going to dedicate some time to that particular subject, women being taken as spoils of war and taken without their permission by soldiers. That happens often. And not only does that happen, women in the military, salute to my brother Big Dog Philly OG, my comrade, salute to my comrade Mouthpiece. Thank you for coming through, my brother. I appreciate it. My comrade P. Moses, thank you for coming through. I appreciate you. Now, soldiers, female soldiers in the United States, oftentimes is not safe around their male counterpart as soldiers. There's stories out there where the women were taken without their permission by the soldiers. Their fellow soldier, the women are not safe. So we're going to unpack that. I have a video presentation consistent with what I'm speaking about, the spoils of war and the Geneva Convention, which is the international law that regulates what the spoils of war could be, because the men became savages. They started pillaging, and they're pillaging today. Whenever you take a nation's natural resource, that's pillaging, because you're taking away the ability to suffice the people in that nation. And in my lifetime, the United States been doing that my entire lifetime. When they went to Iraq, they did it. When they went to Afghanistan, they did it. They're in Iraq now. Now Iran now, and they're doing it. They went to Venezuela, and now they want to take Greenland. That's pillaging. When you're talking about taking somebody's entire country, that is pillaging. And that's really an international crime. But who's going to enforce the international laws against Goliath, the modern day Goliath? Who's going to do that? Who's going to be David and knock the giant down? Salute to my brother Body Artist. Salute, comrade. Who's going to be David and hit Goliath between the eyes and knock the giant down? Who's going to do that? The United States is Goliath. United States is the big bully that goes around taking what they want from people. And they'll use the propaganda machine to justify it, to say they're terrorists, they're mistreating their people. Whatever propaganda that they use that to justify not going to war. Because a war is what the United States is in now. That's a war when somebody's able to fight you back and make you deal with them, make you do deals with them instead of you coming over there and just running through and taking things. That's not a war. When you can easily go in and take what you want, that's not a war. That's an occupation. It's a difference between an occupation and a war. That's an occupation. That's pillaging. They can't pillage Iran. They can't, because Iran is fighting them and their little country's giving them a hard time, to the point that Donald Trump really don't want to be there. He really wants to get out of Iran. He really do. He don't want to be in Iran. He thought it was going to, somebody told him for some frozen of a reason that it was going to be easy, but when they got there, it's not easy. I know Israel wants to fight. They want to still fight, but Donald Trump wants out. He wants out of Iran. Should have never been there in the first place, because it was quiet there. And I'm going to tell you what create terrorists. What create terrorists is not that people are terrorists or they're terrible people or they want to just go around bombing people. Terrorists, so-called terrorists, is created by pillaging. It's created by theft. It's created by terrorists of the country that they want to harm. Like retaliation. American foreign policy creates that. If your foreign policy is that we're going to make a deal and I'm going to get the lion's share of the deal, there's a robbery taking place. There's no robbery in a fair exchange. If it's not a fair exchange, somebody's getting robbed. So the spoils of war in the Geneva Convention, they had to write a law outlawing the way spoils of war. And if you're going to war for the spoils of war and you're lying, that makes the spoils of war illegal. If you're going to war, if you're making up a reason to go to war with somebody just to get their natural resources, the spoils of war is illegal. Which is most case scenario when it comes to this nation. They'll tell you that they're going to a war for a particular reason, but they'll outright lie. They used to care if we catch them in lies, but Donald Trump is so bold that he would tell a lie to us knowing that we know the truth. He don't care that we know the truth. Why? Because he put people in position that he can control. He don't even care that we know that he's lying, but he'll still tell the lie, but he don't care that we know that he's lying. Now we're going to get into the video presentation segment of the strain, the spoils of war, how empires became rich overnight.
Imagine waking up one day as a king, and by sunset,
You're twice as rich as you were at dawn. No investments, no trade deals, no years of careful planning. Just war, just conquest, just taking what belongs to someone else. This wasn't fiction. This was how empires actually built their wealth. While we often talk about trade routes and taxation, the brutal truth is that some of the greatest fortunes in human history were made in a matter of days through one simple mechanism: the spoils of war. Today, we're diving into the dark economics of empire building, where plunder wasn't just a bonus, it was the business model. We'll explore how gold, slaves, and land transformed kingdoms overnight, and why Rome became the perfect case study for getting rich through violence. Let's talk about the spoils of war. Before we get into the specifics, we need to understand something fundamental. Ancient economies didn't work like ours. There were no stock markets, no central banks printing money, and wealth wasn't measured in abstract numbers on a screen. Wealth was tangible. It was gold coins in your treasury, silver plates on your table.
Now, United States Treasury and the Federal Reserve, they took the gold standard and took all this away with the fiat money, with the legal tender. If you look at any dollar, it's a note, a promissory note that said this note is for legal tender. This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. And the international bankers, not the United States, own the Federal Reserve. And when you worked before this currency, this medium of exchange was established, you got silver, you got gold, you got something tangible that you held on to, not something that you fold and put in your pocket. You got what you see on the screen. This is what you got for your work. It's what you see on your screen.
And laborers working your fields. And the fastest way to get all of that? Take it from someone else. War wasn't just about territory or glory. It was an investment. Kings and emperors calculated the potential return before launching campaigns. Would the cost of soldiers, equipment, and supplies be worth what they could seize? And when they won, the returns were staggering. Think about it this way. If you spent a year's worth of tax revenue on a military campaign, but came back with 10 years worth of treasure, you just made the deal of the century. This was the logic that drove expansion. Conquest paid for itself, and then some. But what exactly were they taking? Let's break down the three pillars of plunder that made empires rich overnight. First, the most obvious: gold, silver, and treasure. When an army sacked a city, they didn't just take military supplies. They stripped temples of their sacred.
Just keep in mind, when the army sees these products, when the army sees these jewels, they didn't get to keep none of it for themselves. They had to bring this to who sent them there.
Sacred golden statues, emptied royal treasuries, seized jewelry from aristocratic homes, and melted down everything they could carry. This wasn't petty theft. This was industrial-scale looting. The amounts were mind-boggling. When Rome defeated Macedon in 167 BCE, they hauled away so much gold and silver that the Roman government stopped collecting direct taxes from its citizens for over a century. Think about that. A single victory generated enough wealth.
See, the United States would never do that. As much wealth as the United States generate, as much as they go around looting and stealing, that's because that's what they do. They loot and they steal. As much as they do that, they still want the people in the United States to pay taxes. They say the taxes fund this and the taxes fund that, like schools and what have you. Yet, look at how much they loot and steal. See, the people who are in the government, they loot for themselves. They don't loot for the whole of us. They loot for themselves. They enrich themselves. When they steal this oil, when you got a Texas oil man as the president of the United States and he goes to war with an oil-rich country, he's getting that for himself. He's not getting it for us. BP, British Petroleum, Shell, Sunoco, these companies are owned by people. These are corporations. And that's what the United States is, a corporation. And when they go around going to war, that's why they spare no expense when it comes to the propaganda. Because when they find something that they want in a nation, they're going to go and pillage that nation. They're going to send their economic hitman into that nation to seize what they want. And it's not for us. It's for themselves and their constituents. That's why when the president come in or any leader of a country come in, I started to say company, but because that's what it is, a corporation becomes president of the corporation, and they go and they get natural resources. In particular, in my lifetime, presidents have been oil and poppy seed junkies. Illegal business is what keep the United States afloat. Illegal business.
To fund the entire state for generations. Or consider the Spanish conquest of the Aztec and Inca empires. Hernan Cortes sent back ships loaded with gold that literally changed the European economy. The sudden influx of precious metals actually caused inflation across the continent, a phenomenon historians call the price revolution. But here's what made this so effective. Precious metals were universal currency. You could melt down a foreign god's golden idol and mint coins with your emperor's face on it. Cultural and religious value was instantly converted into liquid wealth. One civilization's sacred artifact became another empire's war chest. And this wealth didn't just sit in vaults. It funded more wars, built monuments, paid soldiers, and created the appearance of prosperity that kept populations loyal.
Proving that war is very profitable. When they go to war, they don't go to war with poor countries. They go to wars with country that they could profit from. If they can't profit from it, if it's not profitable, they don't even bother with it.
Plunder financed the very machinery of empire. But gold and silver were just the beginning. The second pillar of plunder was even more valuable: people. Enslavement after conquest provided empires with something more sustainable than one-time treasure. It gave them free labor for generations. After defeating an enemy, victorious armies would round up survivors and march them back as slaves. These weren't small numbers. We're talking tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands, from a single campaign. Rome, again, provides the clearest example. Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul reportedly resulted in the enslavement of over 1 million people. 1 million. These slaves built the roads, aqueducts, and monuments we still marvel at today. They worked the farms that fed Roman cities. They served in wealthy households, labored in mines, and powered the entire economic engine of the empire. The economic impact was massive. Free labor meant landowners didn't have to pay wages. It meant construction projects that would normally cost fortunes could be completed for the price of feeding slaves. It meant Roman citizens could focus on military service, politics, or simply leisure while others did the work.
This is why this nation spends a lot of money. They spend more money on the military than anything in the United States. Why? Because they can enrich themselves just by sending their army to that nation. Oftentimes, when the United States decide to go to war with someone, they're already there. They have bases, okay? They have embassies all over the world. There's no foreign embassy, there's no other nation with their army in the United States. But the United States military is all over the world with bases and embassies.
And the system was self-perpetuating. Slaves produced wealth, which funded more military campaigns, which captured more slaves, which produced more wealth. It was a brutal cycle that turned human suffering into imperial prosperity. Beyond the labor itself, there was also the slave trade. Captives became commodities, bought and sold in markets throughout the empire. Dealers grew rich, and the state collected taxes on every transaction. War didn't just provide free labor, it created entire industries built on human trafficking. The third pillar was land, and this was the gift that kept on giving. When empires conquered territory, they didn't just take what was there, they inherited everything that land would ever produce. Fertile agricultural regions meant food surplus. Strategic locations meant control over trade routes. Natural resources meant access to timber, metals, stone, and more. Take Egypt, for example. When Rome conquered Egypt in 30 BCE, they gained control of the ancient world's breadbasket. Egyptian grain fed the city of Rome for centuries. One conquest secured a permanent food supply for the empire's capital. The value of that over time exceeded any amount of gold they could have seized or considered trade routes. When Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire, he didn't just take their gold, he took control of the Silk Road network. Suddenly, Greek traders had direct access to Indian spices, Chinese silk, and Arabian incense. Tariffs and taxes on this trade generated continuous revenue. Conquered land also meant colonization opportunities. Empires would settle their veterans on seized territory, creating loyal populations in strategic locations while rewarding soldiers with farms and estates.
Exactly what I just said. They set up there so when things happen, when they want to invade, when they want to, pillage, when they want to occupy, they're already an occupying force. When you have somebody else on your land with bases and embassies, that's occupying. That's being an occupying force. And especially when you're there and you're setting up American foreign policy in somebody else's nation, a foreign policy.
This turned military conquest into permanent occupation and transformed temporary gains into lasting wealth. The brilliance of seizing land was its compound value. Unlike treasure that could be spent, or slaves who eventually died, land produced resources year after year, generation after generation. It was the ultimate long-term investment, and it cost nothing.
Which is why, the trick bags that was handed to us, and they used on us to seize our land here in the United States.
But military victory. Now let's bring this all together with Rome, the civilization that turned plunder into an art form. Rome's rise from a small city-state to a Mediterranean superpower was built on systematic conquest and extraction. Every major expansion came with an explosion of wealth that transformed Roman society. The Punic Wars against Carthage brought massive plunder. When Rome finally destroyed Carthage in 146 BCE, they sold the entire surviving population into slavery, seized all the city's wealth, and even salted the earth according to legend. Carthage, once Rome's greatest rival and a wealthy trading power, was erased and its riches absorbed. The conquest of the eastern Mediterranean brought even more. When Pompey defeated the kingdom of Pontus, he brought back so much treasure that it funded years of public building projects in Rome. The wealth wasn't just metallic, it included art, libraries, and skilled craftsmen who were brought back to beautify the capital. Caesar's Gallic Wars, as mentioned earlier, produced staggering wealth. The gold, slaves, and land transformed Caesar personally from a politician drowning in debt into one of the richest men in Rome. That wealth helped him buy political power, pay his armies, and ultimately enabled his march on Rome itself. But perhaps the clearest example of overnight enrichment came from Rome's eastern campaigns. When Crassus plundered the Temple of Jerusalem, or when Titus later sacked Jerusalem in 70 CE, the wealth seized was so enormous that it financed the construction of the Colosseum. That's right, one of history's most iconic buildings was paid for with the plunder of war. What made Rome particularly efficient was their systematic approach. They didn't just loot randomly, they had organized processes for cataloging, transporting, and distributing spoils. Generals would parade captured treasure and slaves through Rome in elaborate triumph ceremonies, showing citizens the tangible benefits of conquest. This wasn't just celebration, it was propaganda that justified further expansion. So what's the takeaway from all this? The uncomfortable truth is that many of the civilizations we admire, the monuments we visit, the art we study, the philosophical and cultural achievements we celebrate, were often built on wealth extracted through violence. Those marble columns and golden statues,
And that stands today. And yet it's for individuals. It's not for the whole of the nation. It's for individuals. They get their wealth through violence. People are creating generational wealth through violence.
paid for with plunder. Those engineering marvels, built by enslaved populations. That prosperity and leisure that allowed art and philosophy to flourish, funded by systematic conquest. This doesn't mean we should dismiss these civilizations' achievements, but we should see them clearly. The spoils of war weren't a side effect of empire building. They were often the main point. Kings and emperors didn't get rich slowly through careful governance. They got rich.
See, the wars were unjustified wars. It's not like these countries, did something and they had to retaliate. They actually pillaged these countries. They went to war for the spoils. This was before they created a law, an international law, banning, with the Geneva Convention, banning particular spoils of war. It's not that any of these nations adhere to it. It's just the law on the book, like every other law on the book that nobody adheres to.
Rich overnight by taking what others had built. The economics was simple and brutal. Conquer, seize, enslave, and repeat. And it worked. For the conquerors, at least, it worked spectacularly well. Understanding this history matters because it reveals how concentrated wealth and power have often been built, not through innovation or fair exchange, but through organized violence and extraction.
We're sticking to the subject of spoils of war. And we're going to get into next. We're going to go to the next video. And it's talking about women being the spoils of war. Because women...
There is a kind of half-assed...
And we're going to go to how Britain stole 45 trillion from India with trains. Empires of dirt. We're going to go there first. But we're going to get to the women being spoils of war. How Britain stole 45 trillion from India with trains. Empires of dirt.
Liberal idea that while colonialism wasn't great, at least Britain gave India the trains. And maybe that's something they should be thankful for. After all, trains are pretty useful, especially in the 7th largest country on earth. So, colonialism, maybe not all that bad. Unfortunately, Britain also stole $45 trillion from India, all the while exploiting religious divisions between the Hindu and Muslim communities and further turning them against each other. And those beloved railways, they became the sites of mass slaughter while Britain sat back and watched.
Empires of Dirt, a show about Europeans getting rich at the expense of everyone else.
Britain first got involved in India through the East India Company, which had its headquarters right here on Leadenhall Street. A private company owned by London stockholders, the East India Company grew over the next 300 years to become a quasi-governmental body with its own army and laws responsible for trading spices, cotton, silk, and tea.
Let me put my fair use up. Fair use. Fair use. Let me put my fair use up, my disclaimer up, because I know how some of these sites get down. They don't want you playing their things. So I'm saying fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, including scholarship or research, not an infringement of copyright. For educational purposes only, Section 107 of the United States Copyright Act. This may include news videos, articles, other YouTube videos, music videos, etc., etc., etc.
Tea all over the world. By 1858, ownership of the East India Company had been transferred to Queen Victoria after the failed Indian Rebellion. Trains were the brainchild of British engineers. The East India Company would use railways to transport exploited resources like cotton and coal more efficiently around India. And it worked. Between 1853 and 1924, a railway network was created to help Britain extract from India relentlessly. And it's not like we gave India the railways either, by the way. We made India pay for them, and we ripped them off in the process. Despite Indian mechanics having their own efficient, cheap designs, Britain made India buy trains from them. Between 1854 and 1947, over 14,000 locomotives were imported from the UK to India. Initially, Indians weren't even allowed to work on the trains. They were started.
I guarantee you those trains are not worth $45 trillion. $45 trillion. Thousands of trains is not worth $45 trillion.
Entirely by white people, from the board directors to the ticket collectors. The railways made little profit, but British shareholders who invested in its construction made vast returns, guaranteed at the expense of Indian taxpayers who had to pay for it. India's railways were basically like someone burgling your house, building a ramp to wheel all your stuff out, sending you a bill for that ramp, and expecting a round of applause at the end of it. Now that the railways were built, Britain could get down to the task at hand, squeezing India for every last ounce of profit. They were really good at it. In the 60s,
these people are good at stealing. They're good at stealing, and then when you catch them, you can't say anything about them stealing. You can't point that out to them when they're stealing what's yours. They turn red as a beet when you call them out for stealing. They do that when we call them out for stealing our land here in the United States.
1600s, when the East India Company was established, Britain accounted for less than 2% of the world's GDP, while India accounted for almost a quarter of it. By the 18th century, Britain had become one of the most powerful empires in the world, while the prosperity of the Mughal Empire was fading fast. Britain relentlessly squeezed India for every last bit of resource for its own uses. In 1943, up to 4 million Bengalis starved to death, partly because their food was diverted towards British soldiers during World War II. Winston Churchill said the famine was their own fault for breeding like rabbits. After it was no longer profitable.
The famine is their own fault for breeding like rabbits. Just because the Far East so-called Indians were breeding, and because they were robbed of their natural resources that disabled them to suffice themselves as families, Britain is blaming the victim. It's their fault because they're breeding, not that they stole their resources.
comfortable to remain in India, and after receiving huge pressure from the Indian independence movement, the British finally left in 1947. Before they went, they split the country into two: Hindu-majority India and Muslim-majority Pakistan, in an act that became known as partition. But in their haste to get out of the country, British diplomats arranged a shoddy partition agreement that ignored the fact there would be interreligious conflict. Cyril Radcliffe, the British lawyer assigned to draw the borders of Pakistan and India.
Whenever they go somewhere, it always left in a condition after murdering and pillaging, committing all kind of theft. Whenever they go somewhere, it's always left in a condition that causes a civil war. Always.
India was given 40 days to do it. After partition, millions of Muslims trekked to Pakistan and what is now known as Bangladesh, while Indians and Sikhs headed the other way. Violence between Pakistan and India ensued. Within a year of the British leaving, 15 million people were displaced, and between 1 and 2 million people were dead. Trains became the sites for mass murder during the migration. Trains filled with refugees crossing the border on each side were stopped, and everyone on board was murdered. Women were captured and raped. Carriages were set on fire with petrol, with people still inside. The only ones spared were the drivers, so they could transport their trains full of dead bodies to the final destination. The British knew about the train massacres, but they'd already washed their hands clean of India. Prime Minister Clement Attlee, writing to Lord Mountbatten, the last Viceroy of India in 1947, said, "Keep India united if you can. If not, save something from the wreck. In any case, get Britain out." Despite all this, the 4 million starved to death, the careless partition, the $45 trillion they stole from the Indian people, many don't think that the British did anything wrong in India. A YouGov poll in 2014 found that 59% of respondents thought the British Empire was something to be proud of, and only 19%.
I mean, if you look at how proud Peter Hegseth is of what he's doing and what he's done, you don't have a problem with the fact that a bomb dropped over in Iran and killed over 200 schoolgirls. He don't when he's asked about that, he don't even bat an eye. He don't even flinch. He don't even have no type of remorse for that. And as far as like Benjamin Netanyahu, he don't care about the tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of lives that he took using the military.
And were ashamed of its misdeeds. Trains, cricket, empire. What could possibly be wrong with that?
Now we're going to get into how the U.S. stole America. How the U.S. stole America. A lot of us can't distinguish the United States from America. They're not the same thing.
This continent has some of the most dramatic landscapes on the planet, from the ocean shorelines to the alpine mountains and the sandy deserts. And also in this landmass, from coast to coast and everywhere in between, there lived hundreds, if not thousands, of different nations, tribes of people whose land this was. This was their home. But then others showed up to these shorelines in their boats. And that is when everything changed. In the spring of 1803, two American politicians visiting Paris closed the sweetest real estate deal they had ever seen. With the simple stroke of a pen, their country doubled in size, all for just $15 million. But in this deal, which was called the Louisiana Purchase, the US didn't actually buy this land from France. France didn't actually own the land. What the United States was buying was the imperial rights to this huge swath of North America. This basically meant that France would stay out of the way and let the budding new empire, the United States, colonize it without interfering. If the United States really wanted ownership over this land, they would need to get it from the people who were here first, which at the time was lots of different native tribes. These are the people who had been here for thousands of years, way before Europeans had the idea of leaving their continent. And this land that the US just bought was theirs. Oh, and this isn't just me, like some modern enlightened person looking back and judging the United States at this time. The US knew that this wasn't their land and that they were going to have to buy it from the people living there. And their big plan was to do things differently, not like the old imperial powers that they had just broken away from. In fact, George Washington was, quote,
Yet, like the demons they are, they murdered, raped, and pillaged to get it. They didn't buy it. They love to call people thieves. They love to call people hoodlums, but that's what they did to us. Everything that you would go to prison for was done to establish not America, but the United States.
quote, determined that the U.S. government's administration of Indian affairs shall be directed entirely by the great principles of justice and humanity. Go USA, let's do this in the right way. So instead of conquest,
that's making mockery of all those words: justice, liberty, freedom. Make mockery of all of that. They love to say it, these noble words, but they say it making mockery of it.
They would negotiate and sign formal treaties with these native nations. Then they would pay them for their land, fair and square. After all, this was a country whose founding document highlights justice, tranquility, welfare, and liberty. In our series, How the U.S. Stole, we get to see how the U.S. grew from a group of English settlers to a global superpower. But none of those stories would exist without this one, the origin story, the first thing that the U.S. ever stole. So Europeans are pouring into this newly formed country, the United States. And the government is making deals and signing treaties with the tribes, allowing these newcomer immigrants to settle on their land. At first, this is a fairly peaceful transactional process. The U.S.
When you allow evil people around you, when you tell people that visit your home to make themselves at home, they're going to do that. They're going to make your home their home.
US would offer food, farming equipment, cash, the services of a blacksmith, all in exchange for ownership over this land. But unsurprisingly, a lot of these tribes had no interest in moving out of their ancestral lands in exchange for like farming equipment. And this is where all of George Washington's ideals of justice and humanity really start to dissolve. The US was becoming a more powerful nation. They needed more land for their booming population. So the impatient settlers and their government started playing dirty.
The westward movement was like a great tidal wave.
You start to see what happens when these tribes say no to the newly powerful United States. In one instance, one group of tribes up near the Great Lakes didn't want to sell their land. They told the United States that this river would be the border and to not cross it, to stay off their land. The US said no, and they took them to war and lost twice. But on the third time, they won the battle and forced the tribes to sign a treaty giving away all of this land, basically all of present-day Ohio. Something very similar happened down here when the Seminole tribes refused to leave their land. The U.S. military came in, another war, killing thousands, forcing the tribes to sign a treaty and pushing them into the swampy interior of the state, where they had no access to their farmland or the ocean. Down here in what was becoming Alabama, the Muskogee Nation refused to sign a relocation treaty, but not wanting to go to war, agreed to sell a portion of their land in return for a guarantee that they could keep the rest. And the United States agreed, and they actually did. And the Muskogee kept their ancestral lands forever. Womp womp, no, that didn't happen. 4 years later, a bunch of white settlers moved in, boxing the Muskogee out of their ancestral land. As tensions grew because of this violated agreement, the US military was called in to force the Muskogee out of their lands. No treaty was ever signed. I mean, the shenanigans ranged the whole gamut here. They would get tribal leaders drunk to trick them into signing this paper that gave them all the land. They would appoint random people to be the tribal leaders and then tell them to sign away the land for.
You ever notice, like, I've never done it, but when you work with somebody, they always want to go out for drinks. They always want to get you out of your goddamn mind. Let's go out for drinks. I don't drink. Well, have a few. No, I don't drink. It's typical of the European to want to get somebody high or drunk. And that's how we are taken advantage of, or we were taken advantage of, by getting high and drunk. These people, with these people, have them around us while we're inebriated or high.
For the whole tribe. In another conflict, the Sioux and Arapaho nations defeated the US military over and over until the US finally signed a peace treaty acknowledging their land. And they were safe. Until gold was discovered 8 years later, and the US broke their treaty, redrew the boundaries, built roads on their land, and before you know it, you've got a bunch of white guys with gold pans harvesting this land. Treaties and justice be damned. Eventually, other tribes caught on to what was going to happen, realizing that refusing the US government would mean violence. So they would sign the paper, take the money, and leave. Over the course of a
most case scenario with the United States today, when the United States said we're making a deal, we're negotiating, they're going to get the lion's share of that deal. And if you say no to them, they will respond with violence, all the way down to from the government, all the way down to a white boy in a high school in Texas. If you say no to them, they respond with violence.
Almost 100 years, the United States signed 368 treaties with tribal nations who were driven out one way or another to make way for white settlers who established control over this land that their government had stolen for them. And yes, you have all the paperwork, all the spreadsheets that they were making, all the treaties, a nice paper trail, but this was all a facade of justice, a thinly veiled campaign for imperial conquest. Before we go on to the story, I just need to tell you that we don't have a sponsor for today's video. Lately, I've been hearing from some sponsors that my videos are too political, which is kind of a bummer because we work really hard to tell really cool stories. And if that means that people don't want to sponsor us, that's fine. Luckily, we have a Patreon where all of you can support this work. It's called The Newsroom. We call it The Newsroom because it just sounds cooler than Patreon. But it is a place where you can support what we are doing, which is something more and more we need. On The Newsroom, you get an extra video every month. It's a behind-the-scenes vlog from all of the people and processes and happenings around here.
We're going to move on to how the U.S. stole the Middle East. Go around stealing. Just go around taking things, stealing.
The Middle East, the part of Asia that Europeans see as the middle of what they see as the East. Sort of arbitrary, whatever. We call it the Middle East. This part of the world is literally where civilization started, right here in modern-day Iraq. And over the years, the borders here have been redrawn many times as empires have ebbed and flowed through this region. By the way, I didn't make this time-lapse. A very talented YouTuber did.
Yes, they are, my comrade Mouthpiece. They are dirty, brother. They're dirty. And we spoke about it earlier today. You know, smiling in your face. You know, the OJ said it. They said it clearly and they said it perfectly. They smile in your face. All the time they want to take your place. The backstabbers.
And he deserves a medal for it. Or perhaps just a new patron. Thanks, man. Anyway, the most recent carving up of this region happened by European powers. The French, the British, the Russians. I mean, are we surprised? No. Like, of course it was the British. Of course it was the French. Of course it was Europeans. Of course. The lines they drew didn't really take into account language or ethnicity or regional identity. They just sort of sliced it all up amongst themselves and said, these are our new regions of power in the Middle East. Eventually, those European powers left, but the lines they drew stuck around and became the skeleton for what the borders look like today. And this is where our story starts. In the 1930s, here in the modern Middle East. At this point, across the ocean, there was this growing superpower that had spent the last century moving west, taking over this whole continent and beyond deep into the Pacific Ocean. We've talked about that a bit. But things were changing. The world had just fought a brutal world war that was fought with new weapons that were powered by this new important substance, oil. Germany lost that war, in part because they didn't have access to enough oil to keep up with this new style of warfare that relied a lot more on machines. The young superpower realized that access to this stuff would determine who would be powerful and who would not. So they stopped looking west for a moment and turned east, with hopes of finding the fuel they needed to build their power. The U.S.
And ever since then, United States, the president of the United States, been not saying it wasn't before then. Now their main interest is oil junkies. Texas oil men and people who watch presidents who were Texas oil men, they have their aspirations. They get in the office for a particular reason, not to serve the people. That's why I don't vote. Nobody's going to convince me that voting is going to solve our problems. When you're voting for people who are selling the whole entire nation out, these presidents, they want their turn and their piece of the pie. They don't want peace on earth. They want a piece of the pie. When they say peace, no. Their piece has an I in it instead of an A. Their piece has an I in it because I is synonymous to, it's like selfish. Their piece have an I in it and only think about them themselves and not the best interest of the people. So when the president, when they run for president, these presidents, they want a piece of what's out there as far as like the oil, whatever other natural resources there are in other countries. And they get the war drum beating again with the propaganda machine. Because nowadays they don't care what the people say. They don't care if the war is justified or not. They don't care if the war is justified. And they don't care if there's an outcry for an unjust war. They don't care. They're going to send in the military, misusing them. They're supposed to be the vanguard of our nation. They're supposed to secure our borders and make sure that people are safe here. Yet they are sent 10,000 miles away to steal. They're economic hitmen. They're sent there to steal, not to fight a war. I'm going to go out on a limb and say it. I don't think any war that America ever fought, or the United States ever fought, was a justified war. They lied about every last one of them.
U.S. presence in the Middle East started with one little dot right here. But soon that dot would expand into a sprawling network of alliances, covert attacks, flows of weapons, money, and the building of innumerable bases, and eventually turning into full-on ground wars. This is how the U.S. stole the Middle East.
Ready and willing to employ all means necessary.
Okay, so it's the 1930s, and the U.S. doesn't have a significant presence in the Middle East at this point. But that's about to change, because there's a company based in California that wants to explore this vast desert.
And George Herbert Walker Bush was a Texas oil man, and he justified going to Iran in 1991, January in 1991. And before then, the embassy in Iran was, they held the hostages there, and they were released during the inauguration of President Reagan. Yet, during President Reagan's presidency, George Herbert Walker Bush was the vice president. Just understand that he was the vice president and he was waiting for his turn. He only served one term, but while he was there, he secured some oil from Iraq.
For oil.
11,000 miles from San Francisco.
They went 11,000 miles, and guess what? You had one president between George Herbert Walker Bush. Then we had Bill Clinton. He served 2 terms. And then George Walker Bush, the son of George Herbert Walker Bush, became president, and he went back to Iraq.
There lies a primeval desert, a mass of drifting sand and sun-baked earth, 1/3 the size of the United States.
This was sort of a risky decision for the California company because, first off, they had no idea if there was actually any oil here.
They knew it would mean sinking into the desert the money of thousands of stockholders in a project that might well end in complete loss.
And second off, this desert was a part of a very hardcore religious kingdom.
The fact that Mecca is the source and the shrine of Islam gives Saudi Arabia a central place in the Islamic and therefore the Arab world.
That was home to the holiest sites in Islam, run by a...
See, the thing that the U.S. and Israel has done for years in order to seize, in order to bomb, in order to steal from these Middle Eastern Islamic countries is to demonize them. Because if you demonize someone and you destroy their credibility and you make them look like evil people, you are really justifying what you do to them, because nobody's going to feel bad for evil people if they're destroyed. So the propaganda machine is used to destroy the credibility and reputation of the people who are considered the enemy. And that's what the United States did with Islamic countries. Not that they were evil people. I'm not saying that they were good people, but if you're evil as hell, you can't say somebody else evil. If you're the one going 10,000 miles away, 11,000 miles away, and you are stealing, you can't call the person that you're stealing from the bad guy. You can't. You just can't, because they don't come over here. The United States go over there.
A dogmatic royal family that did not like outsiders, especially non-believing Westerners. But even still, the king of the Desert Kingdom eventually gives the California company permission to explore almost 1 million square kilometers of this desert looking for oil. And after a few years, the bet paid off. And on March 3rd, 1938, in this little patch of coastal desert, they struck gold. Well, actually, they struck oil, but it might as well have been gold. So throughout the 30s and 40s, American oil executives, workers, and their families started flocking to the Middle East, establishing the first significant American presence in the region. They set up little cities around the oil operation that were little slices of America, full of the deepest sinful behavior, like allowing women to drive and the consumption of alcohol.
Here is another American colony, complete with air-conditioned houses, 2 hospitals, and an outdoor movie theater.
This is the sort of stuff that is very off limits in Saudi Arabia. It's literally illegal at this point. So you have a lot of Saudis who are not happy about their government letting the Americans in to behave however they want. But the oil kept flowing. And soon the US government goes to the royal family and says, listen, the oil is flowing better than ever. This is awesome. How about we build a little military base attached to our little oil city so that we can, you know, protect you and protect us and protect the oil and stuff. And the Saudis are like, okay, having the great Satan come to our country for oil is one thing, but letting them set up a full-on military base on our soil, and especially when like everyone in our country is not happy with their presence in the first place. But, said the royal family, all of this oil is really valuable and it's really nice and we're getting super rich. So they're like, yeah, sure, set up the base.
And that's been a 50-year business relationship that just ended last year. Saudi Arabia and the oil companies of the United States.
There was one stipulation that the Saudis had for the Americans. You are not allowed to literally plant a flag, no flagpoles of the United States. You cannot put your flag anywhere on this base. Instead, you can put a little plaque on the side of the building so that your flag is not literally on our soil. And that was the deal. And that's exactly what happened. The US sets up its first military operation in the Middle East in the form of a landing strip that is right next to this oil field. Okay, so all of this infrastructure that the Americans were building required someone to build it. They needed a construction company. And there was one construction company that the Americans really liked that helped them build their oil city and their base. This company was founded and run by a guy named Mohammed. Now listen, do you think I'm really giving you the backstory on the construction company that built the air base in the oil city just because that's interesting and I like to talk about construction? No, this is actually very relevant to the story, and you will see why very soon. So the Americans and the Saudis are having this forbidden oil bromance, and it's going really well, and they are just, the oil is flowing, everyone's getting rich. And meanwhile, the rest of the Middle East is looking at Saudi Arabia, and they're like, dude, WTF, why are you like in bed with America? And like, why are you letting them set up a landing strip in your country? And the Saudi royals are like, do you realize how rich we're getting right now? Like, if you were in our position, you would do the same thing, Egypt. Okay, so it's the 1950s, and let's get back to Mohammed, the construction guy. His company, by this point, is thriving. The American presence in oil land is just exploding, and he is building all of the stuff for it. And so this guy is just has a giant business. And he starts to have children. Well, in fact, he had a lot of children, like 54 children, because he had 22 wives, because that is a thing in Saudi Arabia to this day. Anyway, the point is, one of Mohammed's sons is named Osama. I told you this was going to be relevant. Okay, a reminder that Saudi Arabia is not the entire Middle East. So I'm going to leave the Osama bin Laden cliffhanger for a moment to tell you what else was going on in the Middle East at this time. Remember that it was the hunt for oil that brought the US to Saudi Arabia originally. But now, in the 50s and 60s, there was...
Bin Laden didn't like that, the fact that they were able to extract oil all they want. And that's what made Bin Laden become a terrorist. Not that he was a terrorist, that's why they started calling him a terrorist. When you renege on a deal with the United States, you know, in which they get the lion's share of the deal, when you call them out and you say, nah, no deal, because in a fair exchange, there's no robbery, but they're trying to rob you, they will beat the war drum and start calling you, because, listen, Bin Laden was their boogeyman for a while. They knew what he was doing because he was doing it with them. I've always said, I've been saying it for years, they do the dirt with you to get the dirt on you. You go punished, they go unpunished because they are the power structure. But they know you did it because you were together doing it together. So they know all the dirt that this man did because they were doing dirt together. Illegal shit all over the world together. And Bin Laden became a terrorist when he reneged on the deal. That's when he became a terrorist.
A new reason for the US to think about the Middle East. And that reason is because there's another big superpower that has nuclear weapons called the Soviet Union, who is coming into the region and saying to everyone, come join Team Communism. And the US is like, hold my beer. So in addition to oil, the US is now involved in trying to not let the Soviet Union have any power in this region. Over in Iran, there was a democratically elected leader that the US didn't like. They thought he was maybe a little too friendly with the Soviet Union. So they worked together with the British to literally overthrow the government of Iran so that they could install a dictatorial leader that was more friendly to the United States. Little side note here, the airport.
And I believe that was the Shah of Iran. This is getting into my lifetime, the Shah of Iran, then the Ayatollah Khomeini. I remember all this.
The port that I fly out of here in DC is named after the guy who gave the go-ahead for this coup in Iran, John Foster Dulles. So I'm reminded of the whole Iran thing every time I fly. So the US has its oil thing. It's now involved in trying to prop up a dictator in Iran. There's another big thing happening that brings the US into the region, which is that the newly declared state of Israel is starting to piss off its neighbors and starting to look to the US for support. And the US gladly offers it, seeing Israel as a friendly nation in the region that could be a big proponent of US interests. So the US starts to fund Israel with tons of money and fighter jets and all of these things to help them fight their wars against their Arab neighbors. There was a debate happening in the United States on whether or not they should actually do all of this to support Israel so intensely, because they knew if they did, they were going to piss off all of the neighbors in the Middle East. And all of the neighbors are the ones who had the oil. In the end, the US did decide to support Israel. And with that came a major backlash from all of these oil-producing countries in the neighborhood.
It is a crisis of such proportion that we probably haven't even begun to grasp it yet as far as the country is concerned.
Scenes like this are becoming all too common on both sides of the Atlantic. But for America, they are more ominous. They tell the Arabs that their oil weapon is wounding America, the country that supports and supplies their enemy Israel.
Eventually, this backlash against supporting Israel kind of calmed down. There was some peace talks. And anyway, let's get back to Mohammed, the construction guy, and his son Osama, because this is where it really starts to heat up.
And it is this world of religious authority and deeply rooted traditions that is now being challenged by the wealth of oil and the Western invasion it has brought.
So it's now the 70s, and Mohammed bin Laden, the construction guy, is now insanely rich. His construction company is giant, his 54 children are also rich, and his son Osama is growing up and is in his 20s and is looking around at all of this stuff happening in Iran and in Israel and is starting to feel really uncomfortable with the notion of his family being so supportive of American presence in the Middle East and his government, this religious kingdom, home of Mecca and Medina, being so okay with the US so embedded in the Middle East at this point. These are ancient holy lands. Why is my government and my family supporting this great Satan superpower coming in and becoming so involved in the Middle East? So bin Laden sets out on a lifelong quest to fight back against these superpowers, not just the US, but also the Soviet Union, invading the Middle East. He heads to Afghanistan, where the Soviet Union is invading Afghanistan, trying to take it over. Bin Laden wants to fight back. By the way, the same year,
and the United States didn't like the Soviet Union, so the United States helped Afghanistan defeat the Soviet Union.
in Iran, that dictator that the US put in gets overthrown in a giant religious revolution that gets rid of the old dictator that the US liked and puts in a religious government.
That's the Ayatollah Khomeini. That's who that is. Got rid of the Shah of Iran and installed the Ayatollah Khomeini.
Headed by this guy, Ayatollah Khomeini. This new government takes a bunch of Americans hostage and starts off hating the United States. And I mean, can you blame them? If someone overthrew the person I elected, I would be pretty pissed too. So anyway, back to bin Laden. He arrives to Afghanistan with a few things. Number one, a bunch of money. Remember, his family is like super rich. He also comes with construction infrastructure because he's like a construction guy. Like his family knows construction and infrastructure building. But most importantly, he comes with an obsessive dedication to fighting back against any superpower that is invading the Middle East. So Osama joins in with all of these rebel fighters who are fighting back against the Soviet Union. And they fight a long, brutal war. By the way, the US was secretly loving this, loving that the Soviet Union was getting like beat back by these like rebel fighters. So they end up sending loads of weapons and money and support to these fighters, something that will come back to bite them a few decades later. Eventually, Osama and the Afghan fighters beat back the Soviet Union. It was 10 brutal.
That's why when the United States say, well, we don't want somebody with weapons of mass destruction, and they have these type of weapons, the weapons that Afghanistan had, the United States gave to them, and the weapons that Iran had, the United States gave to them, and the weapons that Iraq had, the United States gave to them. The United States, they furnished the weapons when Iraq and Iran was at war. The United States furnished weapons on both sides. Those are facts. They furnished the weapons on both sides. I think it's a 10-year war between Iran and Iraq. The United States gave weapons to both sides.
Years of war, and by the end, these fighters were battle-hardened. Osama was now completely dedicated to his cause of fighting back against superpowers who were coming into the Middle East. So he returns back.
That is actual facts, my brother P. Moses. They are energy harvesting, and they don't have no legal or moral ownership of the oil. It comes from the earth. They have no moral or legal ownership of it. It's like, a damn orange tree or a grapevine. If you didn't plant that seed, it's not yours. But in a capitalist society, that's how it is.
Back to Saudi Arabia, where he starts raising money and awareness for his new group that he started while he was in Afghanistan. It's called Al-Qaeda. And the mission of the group is to protect Islam through violently striking back against big superpowers coming into the Middle East. And Saudi Arabia's like, Osama, like, do you have to do this, dude? Do you realize how rich we're getting? Like, Saudi princes are living on yachts in the south of France and like flying in their private jets. And they're like, dude, chill. Like, it's fine. We get it. We don't like the United States.
Yes, sir, my brother P. Moses. Yes, sir.
States, but like, can you like maybe chill? Our partnership with the United States is actually turning out to be really great. And I know, yeah, they're really into Israel and they're really bad and everything, but like, they buy our oil and they give us weapons and we're like doing just fine over here. Osama doesn't chill, and the Saudi government eventually takes away his passport, not letting him leave, and told him to hush up with all the anti-American holy war talk. So Osama finds another plan to maybe win back the heart of the royals. Saudi Arabia has a next-door neighbor named Iraq, who was run by Saddam Hussein, who Osama sees as a really bad Muslim, totally secular and brutal, and he's just like not a good guy. Saddam is also cashing in on the oil boom. He's building big palaces and statues of himself all over the country. Oh yeah, and he also used the oil money to build a giant army, like the fourth biggest in the world. With this massive army, Saddam decided that he could maybe multiply his oil reserves if he popped down to invade this little tiny country of Kuwait, where there's also loads of oil. This sort of freaked the Saudis out. If Saddam, with his giant army, could grab Kuwait, what would stop him from marching right across this desert into Saudi Arabia? So there's this moment that it's like the moment of infamy of this whole thing, where Osama goes to the Saudis and he says,
"I volunteer as tribute."
He doesn't actually say, I volunteer in tribute. That was Hunger Games.
I believe we have a volunteer.
But he effectively says, I have me and my battle-hardened men who like can go in and fight against Saddam and defend the kingdom. And the Saudis are like, no, we're not gonna like let this ragtag group of like rebel fighters fight off the fourth largest army in the world. And Osama's like, well, we beat the Soviets. Like, they're a big army with nuclear weapons and everything. And the Saudis are like, yeah, because you hid in the hills in caves in Afghanistan. Prince Sultan literally told bin Laden verbatim, quote, "There are no caves in Kuwait." And then he asks them, what will you do when he lobs the missiles at you with chemical and biological weapons?
Yeah, and the United States got involved in this conflict. The United States got involved.
Osama's response, "We will fight them with our faith." And the Saudis are like, awkward? Sorry, dude. Like, instead, the king met with somebody else that he thought would make a much better fit than bin Laden and his faith fighters. Dick Cheney had flown to Saudi Arabia the day after Saddam had invaded Kuwait. At this point, the bromance between the US and Saudi Arabia had cooled a little bit, as Saudi had gotten more and more flack for being in bed with the US. But even despite this, he told Cheney to come with as much force and as quickly as he could. And that is exactly what Dick Cheney did.
Ready and willing to employ all means necessary.
The US went insane here. They recruited 37 other countries, and then they sent more firepower in terms of ships and bombers and troops and all this stuff than you and I could ever imagine. It was insanity. And they totally crushed Saddam. Within a few weeks, they had pushed Saddam back and completely won over the hearts of the royals. The bromance is back in business. So now you have these Saudis that are beaming at the Americans for helping them fight off Saddam. And you have a bunch of bases that the US set up to mount this attack. Way more than before. The US came with all of this firepower and manpower and bases and artillery.
An excuse for them to be there. And once they get there, they never leave. Once they set up those bases on your land, they never leave. I don't care what reason they're there for, they don't leave.
And then they just sort of never left. Something that really pissed off a lot of Saudis who were very uncomfortable with US presence to begin with. But the guy who was most pissed off than anyone in the Middle East at this point, Osama bin Laden, who had not only been rejected by his own country, but then who got chosen instead, but the great Satan, the United States, a power that Osama had built his entire life fighting against. So Osama bin Laden starts to double down on his original mission. He leaves Saudi Arabia and begins coordinating very precise attacks that could really only be coordinated by a guy who was good at technical details of a construction company and who had lots of money to fund it. He carries out attacks against the United States all around the world. And by the late 90s, he starts planning the attack that would change our world forever.
We're setting up an ad hoc.
So this is just the first half of the story. What happens next is something that we're all kind of familiar with. In fact, I think we're all still kind of processing the US presence in the Middle East today and how that all went down. But it deserves taking a look at, and I'm not going to do that right now. I want to make a separate video for...
We're going to go on, move on. We're going to go how the United States stole Latin America. Let's go around stealing. Like I said, they go around stealing. They stole Latin America too.
This military officer is known as a hero and liberator across Latin America for leading the charge for independence from Spanish rule. His name was Simón Bolívar, and he was Venezuelan. In 1829, he wrote, "The United States seems destined by Providence to plague America with misery in the name of freedom." 200 years later, and in every year since, he has proven correct.
Venezuela, people are free. They're free again.
They may use the language of freedom, but what this is really about is theft.
Nicolas Maduro says he has been kidnapped by the U.S.
So we'll be selling large amounts of oil.
We'll be turning over between 30 and...
Yes, they went over there and they kidnapped Maduro, brought him to New York, he and his wife, and they are taking and selling their oil. It's about the oil. It's not that the man was this criminal that Donald Trump said he is. And because for one, he don't have the moral credibility to say who's a damn criminal, being a convicted felon of 34 counts. You know, he's a convicted felon himself. But for him to call somebody a damn felon or a criminal is just crazy. But this is what they take people out of their countries and they steal from them. Just go around taking, and will use the United States soldiers as economic hitmen.
And 50 million barrels of high-quality sanctioned oil to the US.
Calling this colonialism and neo-colonialism.
Theft is the foundation of American power. From the invention of the USA on stolen indigenous land to the kidnapping of stolen African bodies forced to build a new nation on stolen time and labor. And it has stolen from outside its borders ever since. That is especially the case in its own backyard, both to extract wealth and to ensure that alternative systems of wealth can never survive. Venezuela is just a window into how American wealth and power have always worked, through plunder, and history proves it.
I mentioned plunder earlier.
Peace comes to Guatemala.
Hi everyone, it's Tala. Before we dive deeper, we want to give a special thank you to our supporters on Patreon. Doing this work takes time, resources, and editorial independence, so it wouldn't be possible without our supporters online. If you believe in what we're doing and want to be a part of this with us, you can join our Patreon. It's how we keep this going. Now back to the video. It's the 1950s in Guatemala. The majority indigenous Mayan population live in extreme poverty, forced to work land they don't own. Meanwhile, the largest landowner in the entire country, along with owning the railroad, port, and telecommunications, is an American corporation, the United Fruit Company. Guatemalans refer to it as the octopus, its tentacles reaching every corner of not just Guatemala, but most of Central America.
For many years, these fascinating tropical countries have been served by United Fruit Company's Great White Fleet.
On its plantations, workers toil under horrible conditions. Many are debt slaves, and poverty, illiteracy, and malnutrition are widespread. Then in 1951, Jacobo Arbenz comes to power with a mission to redistribute land to ensure the poor have their own, including hundreds of thousands of acres of unused land owned by the United Fruit Company. They were offered compensation, but that didn't matter. United Fruit would not allow this to continue.
No less a figure than John Foster Dulles, head of the State Department, was part of the firm of lawyers acting for the United Fruit Company. His brother Alan was the head of the CIA.
That's why a lot of these people get into politics. Because once you get into politics, you have access to all these other nations. You have access to the world, and they make all these business deals, and they just go all over the world taking things. Now, all the way down in Guatemala, somebody from the United States cornered the market on the fruit. That's crazy.
So it didn't take much of an effort on their part to persuade their president, a military man, Mr. Eisenhower, to give them the green light to overthrow Arbenz's government.
A CIA operation, codenamed PB Success, mobilized disaffected exiles and peasants into action.
What we wanted to do was have a terror campaign.
The CIA trained mercenaries on the ground, even creating a document to train them in the act of killing. One line from the manual says, absolute reliability is obtained by severing the spinal cord in the cervical region.
Armed Guatemalan insurgents stand guard at a Honduras airstrip.
Using these mercenaries and CIA aerial support, Arbenz was overthrown in a military coup in 1954, and an exiled military dictator was installed in his place.
The crowd celebrating their release from Red Terror.
Washington denied responsibility.
The information available to the United States thus far strongly suggests
that the situation does not involve aggression, but is a revolt of Guatemalans against Guatemalans.
Documents confirming U.S. involvement were declassified in 1997. One document was titled Selection of Individuals for Disposal, and another CIA and Guatemala Assassination Proposals. The overthrow of Arbenz ushered in a series of brutal military governments and continued structural inequality, eventually leading to a civil war that would last 36 years. Indigenous Mayan regions were systematically targeted, resulting in over 200,000 deaths in what is now recognized as a genocide. The US knew what was happening, and along with Israel, facilitated it through providing continued weapons, training, and intelligence. According to journalist Vijay Prashad, Guatemala would become a template that would be used over and over again against anyone who pursued economic nationalism or threatened the market domination of transnational corporations. That would be on display again 19 years later. And this is where we'll see another weapon used by the American empire to steal from other countries: economic warfare.
A land of economic contrasts, of great wealth and great poverty. The nation's wealth concentrated in the hands of a very few.
It's 1970 in Chile, and Salvador Allende, a socialist, has won the...
You see, the politician all over, bloodsuckers of the poor. Poly is many, and a tick is a bloodsucker. So a politician is a bloodsucker of the poor, and they enrich themselves and their constituents, don't care about the people. It's not, he wasn't a politician, but he was a leader of a nation who cared about the people of that nation when one part of the nation of Libya didn't have a lake. They didn't have water in one area. So Muammar Gaddafi, he built a man-made lake, and he transported water from one area to the other, so the people in that area, in that region of Libya, could have good, clean water. And the people of Libya, he made sure they all had homes, vehicles, and was able to suffice their families. They had homes. Homelessness was not a thing in Libya. I don't know about now, but under Muammar Gaddafi, homelessness was not a thing. He made sure families had everything to suffice themselves, while he, as the leader of the country, slept in a tent. The people had a home, and he slept in a tent. That's what the leader, Muammar Gaddafi, did in Libya. But other than that, politicians, they enrich themselves and their constituent, and they don't even care nothing about the people. And that's here and everywhere else you go when there's a politician. The bloodsuckers of the poor.
On the presidential election.
I hope that, but he just failed. That's his main problem. He should have kept Allende from getting in.
The US did not like him, and they had spent a decade trying to stop this moment, pouring tens of millions of dollars into covert operations and propaganda, even effectively buying Chile's most influential newspaper. See, Allende was a threat because he threatened American corporate interests. Under Allende, factories were worker-owned, labor rights expanded, poverty programs grew, and key industries like copper were nationalized, a moment Chileans marked as the Day of National Dignity. At the time, Chile's largest copper mines were owned by two American companies, Anaconda and Kennecott. And there were other companies making big money, like ITT and Communications.
Estas mismas empresas que explotaron el cobre chileno durante muchos decenios, solo en los últimos 42 años retiraron más de $4,000 millones de utilidades. $4,000 millones transformarían totalmente a mi patria. Solo una pequeña parte de esta suma aseguraría proteínas para siempre a todos los niños de mi patria.
President Nixon and National
Salute James Jones. Thanks for joining us this evening, brother. Salute to you. Peace and power, family.
Security Advisor Henry Kissinger authorized the U.S. government to, quote,
make the economy scream.
The U.S. cut off bilateral aid, blocked Chile's access to international credit, and pressured institutions like the World Bank to deny them loans. Millions went to opposition parties, newspapers, and business groups, while paid protests and paid trucker strikes crippled food distribution. Kissinger called this creating the conditions for the 1973 coup.
A remarkable political experiment has come to an end.
Led by the CIA's man, General Augusto Pinochet.
Pagaré por mi vida la lealtad del pueblo.
Allende died in the palace that day. Pinochet dissolved Congress, banned political parties, and oversaw a brutal military dictatorship for 17 years.
Illegally detaining, torturing, and killing over 10,000 people, according to the Chilean government. In lesser-known history, the Pinochet government hosted torture sites and prisons on the compound of a pedophilic German cult known as Colonia Dignidad, one of the many atrocities of the regime. But things were great for the U.S. IBM, Coca-Cola, Chase Manhattan Bank, Ford, General Motors, and many other U.S. corporations saw huge profits following the coup due to favorable policies enacted by the government, including a violent campaign against labor unions, slashing corporate tax liability, divestment in education and public services, and many other policies aimed to sell off the rights and riches of the Chilean working class.
Chile shows how powerful
This is evil. This is outright evil.
the economic toolbox really is. Even a country with the resources to build a just economy may struggle and even fail if the US empire decides that it must. Which brings us to Venezuela, where we're not just talking about money, but oil money.
Venezuela unilaterally seized and sold American oil, American assets, and American.
Said Venezuela seized and sold American oil. How? When it's in Venezuela? How can you say? I mean, this is evil. This is the mindset of an evil person that can say something in someone else's nation belongs to, in particular, not the United States, but himself. I don't believe in that, going and stealing from people and taking from people. Not even if it's for me. I don't believe in that. That oil don't belong to the United States. It belongs to the people of Venezuela, like the other oil. Now, if you're going to go there and you're going to buy some of that oil, a fair exchange is no robbery. But for him to go, in order for him to get the oil for Venezuela, you take the leader of the country, you trump up some charges. You know, his name is synonymous to false charges. Trump. You trump up some charges on that person, and then you send agents out there to illegally arrest the man. Take he and his wife out of his country and bring them to New York. That is insane. It's insane.
American platforms costing us billions and billions of dollars.
Venezuela sits on the largest proven oil reserves in the world. Throughout the 20th century, American oil companies were deeply involved in Venezuela's oil sector. Then in 1998, Hugo Chavez was elected president, a former military officer.
So, and Hugo Chavez was not going to allow the United States or any other nation to just pillage their natural resources. He wasn't going to allow that. And evidently, Maduro wasn't. So that's why he had to go. He had to go. And anybody who refuses or don't meet the demands of United States foreign policy, they're going to become a criminal, even if they're not a criminal. They'll be labeled a criminal.
And the first non-white president in a majority non-white country.
The overwhelming majority of Chavez's support came from the poor, who represent 80% of the population.
See, despite having incredible oil wealth, most Venezuelans were very poor, the wealth hoarded by local elites and foreign companies. Chavez ran on a platform to reclaim national resources and use them for local development. And in 2001, Chavez passed a law which ensured the state oil company had a majority stake in all oil ventures with a foreign firm. American oil giants were not happy about it.
Inspired
I'm going to land this right here for this evening. And I'm going to thank everyone for coming through this evening and hanging out with your brother. I hope that this information was some pertinent information for us. Peace to my brother Casino C79. Thank you for coming through, my brother. I appreciate it. I'm going to land this right here. You know, Bro.Nasir is about the rank and file, and this is the rank and file that I belong to. You know, these are the brothers, you know, the thorough brothers that that I belong to. It's a lot more of this, but these are my brothers that's on the screen with me. And these are thorough brothers. That's our general seated. He transitioned last year. And long live the General Abdul Karim Muhammad. Long live the General Abdul Karim Muhammad. But I appreciate everyone for coming through. My brother Casinos C79, my brother Mouthpiece, my brother P Moses, my brother Big Dog Philly OG. What else we got here? Thank you all for coming through. I appreciate it. The brother James Jones, thank you for coming through. I really appreciate it. You coming and hanging out with me this evening. All those who didn't make a comment but still watched, I appreciate you. I appreciate the missus. She's always listening and watching when I go live. And I'm going to continue this stream. We're gonna pick up for where we left off. I recorded the timestamp, and we're going to continue this tomorrow. And I'll leave you as I came before you in ingredient words of peace. Salute to you all. Till next time, this is The Enemy's Public. I am Bro.Nasir. Like, share, subscribe, leave a comment in the comment section. Peace.
Giving out instructions. I just keep it intact, this is a fact, right and exact, I won't step back. Admiration is the feeling that inspires your brain to make you gain self-knowledge, not go insane.